that in life, the CEO of a corporation started at the bottom of the ladder and worked his way up, or herself up the ladder, the corporate ladder, as it's called. And that's the usual rational way on how we deal with our lives, right? You need to get to a certain point. You're starting at the bottom and working yourself up. How does that work, though, in Judaism? How does that work with our relationship with God? How does it work with education? So from a rational point of view, we can say a similar manner that we work gradually from level to level as we grow and we accomplish. But let's take a look at this week's Parsha. Maybe we can get a different perspective on this idea. And we will begin with a story, though. This is a story with the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, one of the things he had to contend with was the beginning of the so-called Enlightenment movement. I recently told a story with the previous Rebbe. This is a story with the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement. And this is engaging an individual who was by the name of Shimon of Zamut, who in a very cunning manner tried to infiltrate into the Hasidic communities in order to propagate his teachings, his value system, which ultimately was au contraire to traditional Judaism. So he was able to do this in Vilna. And he came now to Liadi, where the Alter Rebbe was situated, and he wanted to be able to have an effect on school children, because if you have effect on them, then maybe you'll be able to change their lives. Now, before I tell you the story, just to give you some background, if you recall the story of Isaac Yitzchak, who was getting on in years, and he was going to give a blessing to the firstborn son and to Esau. And of course, as we know the story, Jacob, with the help of his mother, Rebecca, Rivka, got dressed up that he should look and feel like his brother, and he got the firstborn blessings, which he rightfully bought in a legal transaction for a bowl of soup from his brother, whose brother didn't want it, right? The firstborn rights. And what happened after he gave the blessings to Yaakov? So the verse says that when Esau came in to get the blessings, it says, and Yitzchak, Isaac, shuddered, a great shudder. And he said, who then is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate of everything. Well, you had not yet come, and I blessed him. He too shall be blessed. So it says that Isaac, Yitzchak, shuddered. What does it mean he shuddered? So Rashi gives two explanations. He says one explanation is he shuddered because he became perplexed, he became confused. And the second explanation is, as the Medrash explains, that Gehenna, we translate as hell, but it's not really, it's called Gehenna. We'll stick to that word. Gehenna opened up beneath him. All right. So first explanation, of course, he realizes he's confused and didn't realize what exactly happened, therefore was confused in the moment. And the second explanation is that he realized that some kind of sinister element was involved over here, and that's why Gehenna had opened up. Right? That's the second explanation. Okay, that's a background in order that we can appreciate the following story. Okay. Everybody with me? We're good? Wonderful. Okay. So this is told by the previous Rebbe, and it's told in a first person by Reb Zalman of Zamet, who is this dressed as a pious chassid, coming to Liad wanting to be a school teacher with the intent to take these children and turn them against traditional observant Judaism and bring them into an enlightened, becoming part of European culture ultimately, and to adopt, a modern lifestyle. So, story goes as follows. On Wednesday, my turn arrived to be received by the Rebbe for an audience in Gan Eden Elyon, in the upper Gan Eden, meaning in his private chamber. When I entered the Rebbe's chamber, I was struck with fear and awe by his appearance of his face, his powerful and penetrating glance, and his mighty and deliberate voice inquiring, "What can I do for you? What can I do for you?" But I immediately recovered and calmed myself. I said, "I'm an elementary school teacher in my hometown, and I teach my pupils according to the rules of Hebrew grammar. But my fellow teachers oppose me and slander me for it, saying with sarcasm, 'Why don't you teach your pupils the science of linguistics as well?' When I offered it as evidence that a knowledge of grammar is important, what's the evidence? The Rebbe's new text of the Siddur, referring to the Alter Rebbe who is in private audience with them, which follows exactly the rules of grammar, they had nothing to reply. For the public benefit, I request that you give me a letter of reference, which I can use to demonstrate that it is good to teach young children according to the rules of grammar, to accustom them to read correctly and to teach them Tanakh appropriately." Seems to be an A-OK request, right? The Rebbe leaned on his forearms for several minutes. He then raised his head, opened his eyes, and said, "You are correct. The hymns, the psalms, the prayers, and especially Kriyat Shema must be recited with great care, following the rules of grammar. But as for teaching grammar and linguistics as academic subjects, one must be very cautious about doing such a thing. In the heavenly yeshiva, the Rebbe continues saying, there are separate walls for each kind of study. And right between the hall of grammar study and the hall of linguistics study stands the hall of those who deliberately misinterpret scripture." Now, when one soul ascends to heaven each night to renew its life spirit, the soul rises to the study hall that corresponds to the subject he studied during the day. So you're all lucky you're going to go into the Parsha study hall tonight, because this is what you did now. You study Parsha, so you're going to go into that study hall, right? But occasionally one may enter the wrong hall by mistake. Instead of entering the hall of grammar or the hall of linguistics, he may enter the hall of those who deliberately misinterpret scripture. Therefore, one must be very cautious about studying the subjects of grammar and linguistics. When he finished speaking, he again leaned his forearms as before. Then he raised his head, opened his eyes, and asked me how I explained to my pupils the verse, "And Isaac, Yitzchak, shuddered a great shudder." Explain it according to the first interpretation of Rashi, that it means that he was astounded. He was confused. "And why don't you explain to your pupils according to the second interpretation of Rashi, quoting the Medrash, that he saw Gehenna open up beneath him?" he asked. The Alter Rebbe asked him. So he replied, "Shimon, in my opinion," I replied, "one shouldn't fill the pupils' delicate minds with Agada in general, and especially with things that might frighten them, like Gehenna. That's frightening. Such as Gehenna and the like. Even less should one teach small children things that they cannot even imagine. the pupil will still wonder how large and how wide the opening of a Gehenna could be to enter into Yitzchak's small room. And how could its fires, which have been constantly blazing for 5,555 years, enter the room? And yet Esav and his father Yitzchak remain alive and were not burned to a crisp. This is what and how the Alter Rebbe says, does the Medrash know that he saw Gehenna upon open up beneath him? So Shimon remained silent, making no reply. Obviously, I had no answer, he says. Indeed, is this the first gross exaggeration found in the Midrash and the Talmud? He thought to himself. When he saw that I remained silent, the Rebbe said, when Esav entered Isaac's room, Isaac asked him, who are you? To this, Esav replied, I'm Esav, your firstborn son. But this was a lie, for he had already sold his birthright to Yaakov, to Jacob, in a legal sale with all the required formalities. Now Yitzchak knew this, and thus he was very frightened by the lie designed to annul something that is valid under Torah law. This caused him to tremble, for telling such a lie resulted in Gehenna's opening up beneath him. When the Rebbe finished speaking, he leaned on his forearms as he had done before. Then he raised his head and opened his eyes. It is customary that whenever he receives people, even during the daytime, there were two lit candles, a chumash and a zohar on the table. He now lifted one of the two candles and scrutinized me. After which he said, you come here from Vilna, but you claim you're from Zamut. You convert little children to idolatry of Haskalah, but you claim that you're a school teacher. Because of these lies, Gehenna opens up beneath you. How many souls have you already destroyed, yet you continue to rebel? Yes, it's true, you are a heretic, and anyone who goes down that road will never return. He heard those words, he just picked himself up, and he says, I ran out and fled. Powerful story. Powerful story. But let's understand for a moment. Besides the very dramatic episode, and of course the Alter Rebbe's great insightfulness into this individual and that he was indeed a fraud. He came with a full beard. He dressed like a chassid. He was a complete fraud, though. Aside from all of that, but let's get down to the actual point of the conversation. If you're teaching children and you're teaching them about the story of Yitzchak giving the blessings over to his firstborn son, why not just explain it in a simple way to the child? It makes sense. That's something the child could appreciate. Why would you fill the child with an imagery of Gehenna that they don't have an experience of, don't have a mature mind to appreciate and to understand? Yet the Alter Rebbe felt very strongly, not only did he trip him up with this, did he catch him in his own lie, as Yitzchak caught Esav in his lie, right? The parallel. But aside from that, the Alter Rebbe felt very strongly, this should be taught to the children. But why? Teach them from the bottom up. Teach them the simple things that they can appreciate and understand, that they can internalize. Why would you teach them things that are beyond their scope, beyond their appreciation? It doesn't seem to make logical sense. This is where we begin. The question clear? Yeah? Thumbs up? Leanna, Sharon, I see people that are, I don't see you. I just see boxes with names. Okay. So let's begin our discussion about the concept of a hierarchy. Thank you. The concept of a hierarchy when it comes to mitzvahs. Because this is what our discussion is over here. We're saying that there's a hierarchy, an order of things. And Zalman, or Shimon of Zamut, said, he would teach things to the children in a hierarchy, in order of things. The truth is he wouldn't teach them the second interpretation because he didn't believe in it. But that's aside from the point. This is just a fascinating story to serve as a springboard for our discussion over here. So, the 613 mitzvahs. We all know that there's a hierarchy. Remember once, many years ago in our sukkah, we had some families over and we split the men and the women in making a debate. If there's one mitzvah that you should, that you should keep, what should be that one mitzvah? So I led I facilitated the men and my wife facilitated the women. And we're talking about actually families that were pretty distant from observance, and particularly the observance that they came up with. The men said keeping kosher, and the women's mikvah. It was pretty fascinating. I remember that. Oil facilitated. We didn't force our point of view, but quite amazing. And indeed, there is, shall we say, a hierarchy in those things that are more important than those things that are of lesser importance, right? No doubt. But no doubt that in our appreciation and understanding, that's how we would deal with things. But it's not the case. Is that really so? So let's take a look over here. Yeah, in the screen before you, this week's Parsha. Parsha Eikev Tishmu. So, this week's Parsha, you can see in front of you, and it shall be, and it will be, because you will heed these ordinances and keep them and perform, that the Lord your God will keep for you the covenant and the kindness that he swore to your forefathers. So the word over here, because, is the name of the Parsha, Eikev. Rashi says in 3b, V'haya Eikev Tishmun, and it will be because Eikev you will heed. The Hebrew word Eikev literally means heel, like the bottom of the heel. The verse speaks of heeding those minor commandments that one usually tramples with his heel, meaning that a person treats as being minor importance. So what are we learning over here? Eikev means heel, and therefore there are things that with our heel we step upon that they have lesser significance, and the verse is coming to exhort us and tell us, be committed to them too. Don't forget them. Don't ignore them. Don't make them insignificant. They're important. Okay, excellent. But that being said, what are we saying over here? There are mitzvahs that are minor, and there are those that are major. As I said, like when we were in the sukkah and we had discussed what are the major mitzvahs. It's definitely kosher. Definitely family purity, actually. And the third one is Shabbos and Yom Tov, to keep them. As a matter of fact, someone who converts to Judaism, if by the time of their conversion they are not committed to this and commit themselves, they're not keeping them, these three mitzvahs, it becomes questionable, the conversion of the individual. because they are not observing them. So we see clearly that there is a distinction between minor and major. Yet the Torah is telling us that there are those that are lesser of importance, and we should treat them with importance. But to what value? To what end do we treat them as the importance? How do we look at them? How do we see them? To what importance? Like, again, in the hierarchy of things, where are we starting? Starting with the more important things. Then we'll lead maybe to the, to those things that are trodden upon, right? That's what it would, perhaps we might think. What does Jewish thought have to say about this? Here we see there's a distinction, and we are exhorted to keep them, but what manner? How do we see them? So let's take a look. Let's take a look at what our sages say. Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 2. And be careful with light commandments. You see over here, minor, light commandments, as with grave, major commandments. For you know not the reward for the fulfillment of the commandments. Interesting. You don't know the reward, so therefore you should be committed to both of them. How? So Rambam, Maimonides, explains, and he says, the explanation is as follows. The Torah contains positive commandments and negative commandments. With regard to negative commandments, Scripture enumerates the punishment of each one, say for a few of them, right? You eat chametz, leavened bread on Pesach, you eat bread on Pesach, well, the Torah tells us, what the punishment is. Don't keep the Sabbath, there's a punishment, and so on and so forth. Those are the prohibitions in the Torah, right? Some incur death penalty, some incur excision and death by the hand of heaven, while others result in lashes. From all of the punishments, we can infer which prohibitions are severe and which ones are not severe. So in that reference, right, getting back to the Mishnah, we know there's a distinction in the punishment, but that's not about a reward. With regard to positive commandments, however, Scripture does not specify the reward. The reason for this is so that we do not know which commandments requires more adherence than the other. Rather, God instructed us to do various commandments without telling us reward for any of them. Accordingly, we are to treat them all with equal scrupulousness. Aha. Okay, so we're saying there's minor and major, light and weighty mitzvahs, but yet in the end, when it's a positive commandment at least, right? Kashrus, actually, kosher is got a negative side to it. Nida has a negative side, and even Shabbos and Yom Tov has a negative side to it. But the fulfillment of the mitzvah, the positive commandment, reward is not given to us. Why? Because they're all equal. They're all important, and we don't know which one outweighs which. We don't know the system. As a matter of fact, it goes even a step further, that there's a law based on this principle. And the law is when one who is involved in performing a commandment is exempt from another commandment. What does that mean? Let's, by example, as a rabbi, do funerals too often. Shouldn't have to do any. But, right now, that's part of the world since the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Mashiach will come, different world order. But in the meantime, and so the law is that if someone is an oinen means that they're involved with a family member to bury them. So they're oisik b'mitzvah. They are involved, engaged in a mitzvah, in a positive commandment of burial. They're exempt from another mitzvah. They don't put on tefillin, for example. So I remember when my father, Olav Shalom, passed away. It's many years ago, before I married. And It was kind of weird. I couldn't even make brachas because they were all positive commandments, positive mitzvahs. Put on tefillin until after burial, because when you're involved in one mitzvah, you're exempt from another mitzvah. What is that underscoring? What is that telling us? That you're not obligated. Well, on a simple level, you might say, well, you're in the middle of one thing, finish what you're doing, and, then you can get to the next thing, right? Because you're engaged, you're involved in something. That might be a simple, conventional way to understand that. But based on what we just learned, no. We don't know the reward for the positive fulfillment of the commandment. Hence, if you're engaged in this right now, don't go to a different commandment. Maybe this one is a greater reward from heaven than the other one. So just engage in what you're engaged in. That makes sense, right? Rambam, Maimonides, based on the principle our sages stated that one who is involved in performing a commandment is exempt from another commandment without comparing the weight of the commandments that he is involved in to the other one which he is refraining. Because you don't know. Don't weigh them. You don't run away from this mitzvah because, this one's a bigger one. You're going to get more reward over here. Well, we don't know. Does that make sense? So in a similar vein, for this reason, our sages, Maimonides continues, also stated, we do not pass up on a mitzvah, meaning to say that when you have a chance upon an opportunity to perform a mitzvah, do not pass it up the chance to do for the chance to do another mitzvah, rather fulfill the mitzvah at hand, right? In other words, by divine providence, God brought you to this mitzvah. You would say, well, you know what? This mitzvah maybe is not so great. And I've got another opportunity ahead of me for another mitzvah. No, divine providence brought you to this mitzvah. Do it. Why? Well, you don't know the reward from this one. Maybe it's going to be greater than the reward of the other one. And since you don't know, this is what is at hand. This is what you should engage in. Is that clear? Wonderful. Okay. Well, so it would suggest then that what? All positive commandments created equal, because you don't know the reward. Is that the final say? Is that all there is? Do we have another perspective on this from our sages? Can we see it from a different point of view? Well, let's take a look at the Talmud and the sages, what they say about the mitzvah of called Shaluach HaKan, which is protecting the mother bird by sending her away before taking its eggs. So the Talmud says, if with regard to sending away the mother bird, which is a mitzvah whose performance is simple, as it entails a loss of no more than an isser, which is the value of the mother bird, because you sent her away to take the eggs, right? The Torah says in this performance of this mitzvah, right, which you didn't lose that much by sending away the mother bird, right, that may be well with you and that you may prolong your days, live a long life. Certainly the reward for fulfilling demanding mitzvahs is even greater. What is this suggesting to us? The fact that the Mishnah is telling us that there is a big distinction. There are certain rewards. Look at this. There's a reward here that you can gain by sending away the mother bird, and you're going to have it good for you, and you're going to live a long life. In my life, I've only had one opportunity that happened. So, it seems like the Mishnah there is telling us clearly that there is a reward And if there is a reward in this particular mitzvah, does that not undermine what we just previously said, where we said everything is equal? We don't know the reward, but here there is a reward. So the Maharal from Prague asks this question and gives the answer. And he gives the answer as follows. There's a difference between reward for the inherent value of a mitzvah and the reward for the effort that one puts into the mitzvah. The inherent value of the mitzvah is from God. The effort that we put in is from us. So the verse is telling us as follows. When it comes to your effort to put into a mitzvah, so the mitzvah, Shluach HaKan, sending away the mother bird and having compassion for her before you take away her eggs, is about the effort. Your effort is minimal. Your effort is minimal. And look what the reward you get. So imagine if there's a great effort that you need to put into doing a mitzvah, imagine the reward you will get. But that's not speaking, the verse is not speaking about the inherent value, hence reward, for a mitzvah. Welcome, Tim. Welcome aboard. And Shoshana, Bina. It's not speaking about the inherent value. This is where the Maharal makes a distinction. When the Torah tells us that any positive commandment has no distinction, we have to look at them all equally. The ones that are seemingly more weighty and the ones that are seemingly more light, as it were, or minor, that's the inherent value that we're making a reference to. That inherent value, God's instruction, that it gives us a way to refine ourselves and to connect to Him, we can't make a distinction. Where can we make a distinction? Is in my effort in engagement in that mitzvah. So there's greater reward for the more effort that you put into the mitzvah, but not for the inherent value. So what we have over here is very clear then. When it comes to mitzvahs, our notion would be that there's going up the ladder, there's more important ones that you start off at the bottom of the ladder or wherever point you are on your journey on the ladder, and you're dealing with what you have at your level where you're at right now. That would be the conventional wisdom. And what we are learning over here is that no, every mitzvah is an opportunity to getting closer to God, that we can have the self-refinement as a result. And therefore, we can't make a distinction. What does that mean? And how do we understand this in a deeper manner in the light of the teaching of Chassidus? Let's see. So it comes down to the very simple word of a mitzvah. So, for most people, present company excluded, a mitzvah is merely a nice, good deed, right? That's how most people think. It's a mitzvah, meaning a nice, good deed. I'm sure there's a truth to that, absolutely. But of course, we know that the word mitzvah means commandment. And it indeed is a command of God. It's not just a nicety that a person engages in, but it is indeed a commandment of God, right? The Alter Rebbe takes it a step further and says the word mitzvah has a root word savsa, which means connection. It's a connection to, to God Almighty. That through the physical world, as much as we might feel that the physical world is devoid of God, but it is the vehicle that through it we can have a connection to God. And not only a connection to God, but to the very core and essence of God himself in doing a mitzvah. In other words, till now, what we have understood is as follows. Doing a mitzvah is doing a positive commandment. Don't make a distinction. Why? Because you don't know the reward. And therefore, what you're engaged in right now, divine providence, this is what God brought you to, and this is what you need to be engaged in and engaged fully in that mitzvah. Perhaps a reward, this is going to be a greater reward than the other thing you were contemplating to do. Now what we're saying is no. It's a deeper idea that a mitzvah is an opportunity for us to connect to God, to the essence of God. And not just to, when we say the essence of God, meaning, reward and punishment, what is that? Or better yet, in a relationship with a loved one. So you do something for a loved one, and you get something back, a reward, whether it's a smile from them, whether it's a child gets a lollipop, the university college student gets a car from the parent, right? Because they graduated, whatever the case may be. So it's all like a consequential result of the relationship, and that's what reward and punishment is. So we don't know what is going to be more rewarding, more self-refining, more of a connection, so on. Here, the Alter Rebbe takes it a step further and saying, no, there's an inherent value just in the connection itself as an end in itself. And to bring across the importance or the value of this, the Rebbe gives a metaphor. Think of it for a moment. We're finite individuals, and what does it mean that we can connect to God? God's infinite. In what manner, in what way does it come about, that connection? So by metaphor, take a great academic scholar who lives in the world of academia, who is, an Einstein. And this individual now engages a simple person who he has no relationship with, in the sense that they don't live in the same world. He lives in the world of academia. His head he's only, so to speak, like a head, right? And a simpleton, what does he have in a relationship to him? They're not in the same world. But when this person, this professor, will ask this simpleton, please do me a favor. Can you do this for me? Whatever it is. Bring me a glass of water. You can open up the window. Get the air conditioning working over here. It's hot in the room. Whatever it is. And now that person does it. All of a sudden it becomes into the world, into the view of this academic, right? Just from that instruction. And by carrying out that instruction. So the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe uses this rather as a metaphor to understand our connection to God. We are not merely like a simpleton before God. We're so far removed, so distant. Yet God gives us a mitzvah that, even though it's in material terms, it forges the relationship to the essence of God. Meaning, does everything have a relationship to God? Of course. The whole world. It's God's creation. So it has a relationship. but doesn't have a relationship to the essence of God. It doesn't touch the core of God. But the mitzvah gives us that capability and that opportunity. There's a lot to discuss about this, that is because it's very deep and profound idea. So the connection over here then becomes the connection on God's terms, just like the academic. It says, this is what I need. God says, this is what I need of you. This is how we forge a relationship. Is there a relationship beyond the mitzvah? Based on the soul, there is. But to reveal that relationship, to have an ongoing relationship that we can now give something back to God, it's by way of the mitzvah. So what does that mean? With this concept then, it's not about the reward or the punishment that there is in a mitzvah. Of course there's reward in every mitzvah. Every mitzvah is refining us. Every mitzvah is elevating us. There's no question about that. We see in our lives, by doing mitzvahs, how that helps us, uplifts us. But that is the consequence of the mitzvah. But there's something essential, a quality of the mitzvah, and that is the connection itself. So when it comes to an opportunity to connect, think about it in human terms with a loved one. I know we're blessed with 10 children, 9 of which are married. The 10th, God willing, soon. God's help. Mazel. And, we see how the shidduch process is an amazing process of bringing two people together. And you see it afterwards, how it continues in marriage. Is it the big things necessarily, or is it the small things in the relationships that are important? The truth is, there's no big or small. It depends. If it's about a reward or God, or being sent into the doghouse, the punishment, so then there's big and small. But if it's about the desire to be connected, so it doesn't matter if it's a big thing or a small thing. There is no distinction. You're not looking to make a distinction. Oh, this is going to get me a lot of brownie points. This is going to, really get me further ahead. Then it's not about the relationship. It's about what I have from the relationship, the reward. And I at least didn't get the punishment. I'm not in the doghouse. If, though, it's about the relationship, if it's about safsa, about the connection, so therefore there is no big or small. There's no such thing. It's a desire that this is an opportunity that I can connect, and therefore it's about the connection. So whether it's a biblical law, rabbinic law, or even a custom, a simple custom. Matter of fact, in the Chabad Haggadah, not around Pesach time, but, in the Manishtana halayla hazeh, right? Remember? 4 questions. So in the other Haggadahs, what the first question is? Matzah. Why do we eat only matzah, right? And then it goes into the 4 matzah, bitter herbs, and then I think dipping. Okay, I don't know. I know matzah is the first thing. You know why? Because it's biblical. It's a biblical commandment. It's a weightier thing. So that's it's the first thing mentioned. In the Chabad Haggadah, you know what the first thing is? Dipping. Dipping into, why do we dip into salt water and to dip later on into charoises? That's only a custom. So the Rebbe explains is because when it comes to connecting to God, even a simple custom is an opportunity, and actually the custom brings out how devoted we really are. When we fulfill a biblical commandment, well, maybe I'm not doing it because of the connection. I'm doing it for the reward or for the lack of punishment. So it's nothing to do about the relationship. It's got to do about what's going to be, good for me. But if it's about the relationship, it's about the connection. So then a custom, seemingly, since only a custom, so I didn't do it. Yeah. Okay, you're right. No one's going to give it to you. But that's missing the point. It's not that you didn't know, if I would have known that this is really important, I would have done it. What does it mean really important? In other words, it's very rewarding. I would have done it. No, that's not why you're going to do it. Come to the level of understanding and appreciating that through this, as light and as minor, it's only a custom, but it allows you to be connected to God. And not just to God, not to a ray of light of God, not to a, shall we say, to an external light that you will be emanating from God. No. You're touching the core and essence of God himself. Because that's where it comes from, this custom, this rabbinic law, this biblical law, ultimately. That's what it touches. It touches him. Just as it touches the core and essence of us. Then, minor, weighty, it's just an opportunity on how I can connect. If we live that way with our relationships, of course, our relationships will be very different. How can we do it with our relationships if we can do that with God, with small, minor mitzvahs, whatever it is? So now, that being said, of course, people come to me and they ask me, Rabbi, I want to make a resolution for my birthday, what resolution should I make? So, of course, there are things that are more, like instead of telling them just, to do my machrein, the after waters, before you bench, before you do birkat hamazon, you do the waters. So you say, do that, do that before putting on tefillin. Don't put on tefillin first. Light Shabbos candles first before doing that particular custom. But that's not the point over here, of course. We're talking about an attitude of how we should look at mitzvahs, how she would look at things. So that in that sense, there isn't really a hierarchy. It's just an opportunity in how we can connect. And with that also gives us an indication that even when we're teaching something, sometimes when we're teaching something, we say, like Shimon of Zamutz, who was an imposter, but had an argument. Teach the simple thing. Sometimes we don't teach just the simple thing, maybe something that's abstract and beyond, because in that abstract and beyond teaching, there's also a connection to God. Just as in the simple teaching, there's a connection to God. Even that which sometimes is beyond the capability and the grasp needs also to be taught, because in that teachings is God, is the wisdom of God, it's the connection to God. And since it's part of Torah, give it to them. And actually, when it comes to teachings to children, since they're pure of soul, give them those things that are a little more difficult or a little more abstract or a little beyond, because ultimately, when you teach it to them when they're young, it'll become a part of them. And afterwards, when they get older, when they're using their discerning mind, now that discerning mind has already been infiltrated with the spirit, with the mysticism, with the abstract ideas that didn't make sense to them at the time, but they just accepted as whatever they were told, and then that forms the basis of being able now to use a discerning mind, because ultimately the discerning mind needs to be based on the faith that the soul has. So the soul, its faith is beyond understanding, transcends our logic, and therefore we need to be able to give that which is beyond the logic of the mind to the child. We're all children in that respect, and that it serves as the basis. And at the same time, you give them the simple, you can give them the abstract, and that which is lofty and beyond capable. So that is the thought of the week. Any questions? Any comments? Let's see online over here. Eva, welcome, joining us. Jason and Alice, thank you for joining us. Karen and Sandy, Heather, my son Label, and Melanie from Montreal. Arena from Colorado, thank you for joining. Valerie and Alan from LA. Paula from Bakersfield, California. Sylvia, I hope you got back on. All right. I'm unmuting. Anybody has a comment, a question? Welcome, Leslie, Israel, Janabina, Tim, Linda, Denise, Sharon, Joelle, Morton, and Leanna here on Zoom. Thank you for that, Connie.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Great
I
class as always.
I guess there's no questions. It's all clear. We're all connected.
No, thank you for acknowledging all of us. You could keep talking.
I wanted to hear what you have. Do you have any questions or any comments or any thoughts? Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, why, if the reward in essence is the connection to God, then why would there need to be any reward for any of the mitzvah if you're getting a reward just by connecting to God?
Excellent, Andrew. Excellent question. So I'm going to just mute everybody so I can give. Andrew is asking, why does there need to be any reward if it's about, in the end, about a connection, right? Well, Rashi gives a simple explanation and the Midrash explanation, right? In other words, you need the simple thing and you need the deeper thing. We need to be able to connect on different levels. You need to teach a child according to their ways. So their ways means that you need to prompt them and give them some kind of reward for their accomplishment because they're children. Of course, we want to have them graduate beyond being children and do it for its own value, lishma, to connect, period, and nothing else. That being said, though, God provides on all levels for all of us that which is necessary so we can indeed do the mitzvah. So the truth is there is reward, but ultimately we shouldn't serve for the sake of the reward. Definitely there's reward. That would not be fitting, that God would not be in his kindness not giving us reward for all the efforts that we put in to serve him. Ultimately we shouldn't do it for that reward, but the reward is there out of his kindness. And it needs to be that when we lead a observant life of fulfilling Torah mitzvahs, that it should be rewarding in its fulfillment, rewarding in its connection, and rewarding in material and spiritual gains that we have Ultimately, we need to have it all. And God wants to give us all of it. Our intent ultimately should be, like you said, Andrew, absolutely. Ultimately, we should serve God not on the condition to receive a reward, but to do it for the sake of the connection. But that's ultimately, right, where we need to come. When we're young, when Andrew, when you were born, I understood you cried. And the reason why you cried, Andrew, is because all the children in the ward were hungry. That's why you cried for them, because they were hungry. Of course not. You cried for yourself, right? Because you were hungry. Of course. We come into this world, we only think of ourselves. There is only ourselves, right? Then when you're a toddler, your mother says to you, share the toys. Don't just think of yourself, right? And she says, for a reason, because if you won't share, then the kids won't share with you. You won't have a friend. Well, that's a reward, but at least you're sharing. And finally, you know what? Be good. You know why? Because that's, for goodness sake, for God's sake, be good. Just because you got to be good for no reward. So that's ultimately where we get to. In the meantime, we need to give the reward for those who are only prompted by that, and hopefully they outgrow it and become what we need to become. Excellent. Thank you for the question. Any others? Questions? Denise, thank you. Thank you, one and all. Wish you a Shavua Tov, a good Vach, a good week. And we will continue our Fabringens daily in Tanya. See you. Have a great day or good night.